Have you ever heard of a king who possessed the gift of wisdom, but whose downfall was caused by a harem of 1,000 women? This is the story of Solomon, the wisest, richest, and most powerful king in biblical history. He made Israel prosper like never before, but he had a fatal weakness: women. His intense desire for them clouded his judgment, and although Solomon had all the tools to be Israel's greatest king, he ended up becoming a tragic lesson of how temptations can bring down even the wisest of men. God granted Solomon the gift of wisdom, and with it, he transformed Israel into a powerful kingdom, full of wealth and trade relations with distant lands. Israel's power was immense under his reign, and his prudent decisions made him a central figure on the world stage of that era. However, despite his wisdom, Solomon succumbed to a great mistake. His harem was vast, a lush garden consisting of 700 wives and 300 concubines from all corners of the known world. Egyptian princesses, with deep and mysterious eyes, shared space with women from Moab, Ammon, Edom, and Sidon. Each one of them had her own story, her own culture, and dreams that intertwined with Solomon's magnificent court. But instead of strengthening the kingdom, these unions, often political, brought unforeseen consequences. Solomon's harem became a labyrinth of political intrigue and fragile alliances. Each woman who entered his court brought not only her beauty, but also a piece of her homeland. Solomon's palace became a living mosaic of mixed cultures, with customs from all parts of the known world. While these alliances initially secured peace for Israel, they also brought gods and practices from foreign lands, challenging Israel's pure monotheistic faith. Solomon, who was once a fervent defender of the God of Israel, began allowing the practices and gods of his wives to infiltrate his kingdom. Although he had built the great temple of Jerusalem, dedicated to the God of Israel, his heart started to divide. In the end, he permitted the construction of altars for foreign gods, a practice that angered the God who had blessed him with wisdom and power. Was the harem of 1,000 women the reason for Solomon's downfall? It's a question that echoes to this day. In this video, we will explore the full story of Solomon, from his legacy of wisdom and achievements to his tragic fall. Did he truly manage to control the demons that haunted his life? What were the consequences of his death for the kingdom of Israel? Before we move on, don't forget to subscribe to the channel and turn on notifications so you don't miss any of the incredible biblical stories we're going to share. Now, let's go back to the year 990 BC, to the ancient city of Jerusalem, where a new prince had just been born. His name was Solomon, which means peace and friend of God. He was conceived from the relationship between King David and Bathsheba, one of the most famous scandals in biblical history. David, the brave shepherd who defeated Goliath, and whom you've undoubtedly heard of, became involved with Bathsheba while she was still married to Uriah, a loyal soldier in David's army. David, in his desperate attempt to hide the sin of adultery, sent Uriah to the front lines of battle, ordering the other soldiers to withdraw and leave him unprotected. As expected, Uriah met his death on the battlefield. However, God did not turn a blind eye to the king's sins. The death of David and Bathsheba's first child was seen as divine judgment, a punishment for the adultery they had committed. But amid repentance and sorrow, God showed mercy. He forgave David, and from this reconciliation, Solomon was born, a peace offering between heaven and earth. The young Prince Solomon grew up under the tutelage of a wise and enigmatic man, the prophet Nathan. While David was busy tending to the affairs of the kingdom, Nathan became Solomon's guide and mentor, shaping his mind and spirit with profound teachings and divine revelations. Nathan, with his piercing gaze and calm voice, saw an extraordinary destiny in Solomon, something the other sons of David did not have. The prophet recognized the spark of wisdom and the promise of greatness in the young prince's heart. However, Nathan also knew that Solomon was not David's firstborn, and there were older brothers, like Adonijah, who could claim the throne. To ensure that the divine prophecy was fulfilled, Nathan began to devise a bold plan. Nathan knew the deepest secrets of David's household, including the adultery between the king and Bathsheba. Determined to use this knowledge to his advantage, he began convincing David that Solomon, and not his other sons, should be Israel's heir to the throne. In private audiences with the king, Nathan wove his web of influence, carefully planting the idea that Solomon was destined to be David's successor. He used prophetic words and visions to convince the monarch that it was God's will for Solomon to rule Israel. Over time, David began to see in his youngest son the promise of a glorious future for Israel. So, when David became ill and his death approached, he mustered the strength to officially name Solomon as his legitimate successor. At just 15 years old, Solomon ascended to the throne of Israel. However, his reign began under the shadow of internal threats. He knew that his older brothers could conspire against him, seeking to usurp the throne that, by birthright, should have been theirs. His father David's warnings echoed in his mind, reminding him to always be vigilant against enemies both inside and outside the kingdom. Determined to secure his power, Solomon took drastic measures early in his reign. A widespread purge began, with Joab, David's chief general, being one of the first victims for supporting Adonijah's claim to the throne. Solomon eliminated all potential threats, including his own brother Adonijah, ensuring that there would be no conspiracy against him. But Solomon's strength wasn't just in brutality. He also demonstrated a strategic vision beyond his years. He strengthened Israel's army and forged a powerful alliance with the Pharaoh of Egypt by marrying his daughter. The union with the Egyptian princess was a shrewd diplomatic move, strengthening ties between the two nations. Despite his turbulent start, Solomon was still a young king, with many doubts and uncertainties about how to govern his people. It was then, on a quiet night, that he fell into a deep and revealing dream. In that dream, God appeared before Solomon and made an extraordinary offer. "Ask for whatever you want, and I will give it to you." With a humble heart and aware of the immense responsibility that weighed upon him, Solomon responded, "Lord, you have shown great kindness to your servant, my father David, because he was faithful to you. Now, give your servant a discerning heart to govern your people and distinguish between right and wrong. For who is able to govern this great people of Israel?" Solomon's request pleased the Lord greatly. Instead of asking for riches, long life, or the death of his enemies, he asked for discernment to govern justly. God, impressed by the purity of his heart, said, "Since you have asked for this, and not for long life or wealth for yourself, I will give you a wise and discerning heart. There will never have been anyone like you, nor will there ever be." Solomon awoke from his dream, carrying the most precious gift any ruler could wish for, divine wisdom. This encounter with God marked a turning point in his life and reign. Solomon's wisdom soon became legendary. From all corners of the earth, kings, queens, and leaders of distant nations came to Israel to seek his counsel. He became known not only for his ability to solve complex disputes, but also for his insight into life, justice, and morality. One of the most famous examples of his wisdom was the judgment of two women who claimed to be the mother of the same baby. The dispute was intense, with each woman asserting that the child was hers. Solomon, in his wisdom, ordered that a sword be brought and suggested cutting the baby in half, giving half to each woman. While one woman agreed to the proposal, the other begged that the baby be given to her rival so that the child could live. Solomon immediately recognized the true mother and returned the baby to her, demonstrating his ability to see beyond appearances. With peace and prosperity established in Israel, Solomon turned his attention to building the Temple of Jerusalem, a promise made by God to his father, David. The temple would be the center of worship to God and a symbol of the eternal covenant between God and the people of Israel. Solomon sent emissaries to Hiram, king of Tyre, a city known for its building expertise and for supplying valuable materials. Hiram agreed to provide the cedar wood and skilled craftsmen needed for the temple's construction in exchange for food and other goods. The construction of the Temple of Jerusalem took 7 years and was a monumental project. The building was erected with unparalleled precision and beauty, following divine instructions. The walls were lined with cedar wood, and pure gold covered every surface. The temple became the spiritual heart of Israel, a place of worship and sacrifice. But Solomon did not stop there. For 13 years, he also dedicated himself to building his own palace, a majestic structure that reflected his power and wealth. Solomon's palace was an architectural masterpiece, with spacious halls, towering columns, and lush gardens. Solomon's fame and wisdom spread so far that even the Queen of Sheba, from a distant land, heard of him. Curious to test the greatness of the king, the queen made a long journey to Jerusalem. When she arrived, she brought with her an impressive entourage and exotic gifts, such as gold, spices, and precious stones. She tested Solomon with difficult questions, hoping to challenge him. However, the king answered all her questions with clarity and wisdom. The Queen of Sheba was so impressed that she declared, "It is true what I heard in my own land about your achievements and your wisdom, but I did not believe it until I came and saw with my own eyes. Indeed, not even half was told to me. Your wisdom and wealth far exceed the report I heard." The visit of the Queen of Sheba represented the pinnacle of Solomon's glory. His kingdom was prosperous, his wisdom revered, and his wealth legendary. The king had reached the height of his greatness. However, behind all his glory, something dark was brewing. Solomon's many foreign wives began to exert a negative influence on him. Though he had been a fervent defender of faith in God at the start of his reign, over time, his loyalty became divided. To please his wives, Solomon allowed the construction of altars to pagan gods in Jerusalem. He began worshiping Ashtoreth, Molech, and other foreign gods, straying from the teachings of his youth. Idolatry took root in his heart, and the king who had been blessed with divine wisdom was now shrouded in spiritual darkness. God, who had promised Solomon great blessings if he remained faithful, was deeply disappointed with his behavior. In his righteous anger, God sent a prophet to confront Solomon and warn him of the consequences of his disobedience. "Since this is your attitude, and you have not kept my covenant and my decrees, I will certainly tear the kingdom away from you and give it to one of your servants," said the prophet. God's words echoed like thunder in Solomon's heart. The kingdom he had built with so much wisdom and effort was now threatened with division after his death. Solomon's idolatry and disobedience began to have an immediate impact on Israel. Internal and external adversaries arose, taking advantage of the king's spiritual weakness. Among these adversaries was Jeroboam, a servant of Solomon, who was secretly anointed to rule over 10 tribes of Israel after the king's death. Solomon tried to resist the forces that threatened his kingdom, but he was spiritually weakened. His wisdom could no longer save him, for he had strayed from God's path. In the final years of his life, Solomon finally recognized the futility of his choices. He realized that his pursuit of pleasure, power, and material wealth had led him far from God. In an act of repentance, he wrote the book of Ecclesiastes, a profound work reflecting on the fleeting nature of life and the vanity of earthly desires. "Vanity of vanities," he wrote, "all is vanity." These words resonate to this day, reminding us that the pursuit of happiness in material things is futile without a true connection with God. Though Solomon was one of the wisest and richest kings in history, he ended his life as a broken man, aware of his mistakes and how he had strayed from the path that God had set for him. Solomon died after reigning for 40 years, leaving behind a legacy of greatness, but also of destruction. His son, Rehoboam, inherited a weakened throne, and shortly after Solomon's death, the kingdom was divided into two parts: Israel in the north and Judah in the south. Solomon's legacy is complex. He is remembered as the man who brought great wisdom and prosperity to Israel, but also as the king who, in the end, turned away from God. His story is an eternal warning of how even the wisest can fall if they do not maintain their faith and obedience to God.